Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the first 15 verses of the 19th chapter of Proverbs. And we did recently the 18th proverb in an entire lesson, but even more recently than that, what we've been doing is dividing these chapters in half just because there's so much to say, but I did manage to squeeze it all in. You can type in Corey Johnson 18. We just want to briefly review what we covered in that. There are 10 of the 24 verses which come out of that, which pertain to language and conversation, and it's really an art form, and Solomon has 10 verses which comment on it, and we're not going to delve into these as extensively as we are those of the 19th verse, but the second verse of the 18th chapter reads, "A fool does not delight in understanding, but in uncovering his own hearts. And one of the ways the fool does that is through talking and yapping. A prudent man concealeth knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaimeth foolishness." We read of in 12:23 of the same book. So foolishness by its very nature does not seek to learn, but seeks to make itself known. It doesn't seek to know, it seeks to make itself known and advertise and self-aggrandize and self-advertise. Little does the fool know that they are revealing exactly how foolish they are to the audience in the room. Verse 4, "The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The fountain of wisdom is a flowing stream." So the deep waters, that just means that there's depth beyond the surface of the words of a man's mouth, and our words do carry meaning and significance and substance beyond their exterior appearance or superficial surface. Verse 6, "A fool's lips enter into strife, and his mouth calls for blows." So foolish people are destructive people whose mouth gets them into trouble. They invite and enter into strife because they invite it into their lives with their own mismanaged words, and his mouth calls for blows, so he's inviting the physical harm through his own mismanaged words and language. Next verse, "A fool's mouth is his ruin, and the lips are the snare of his life." So there is power in words, and we have the power to destroy others and ourselves through our poor choice of words. A fool, by definition, will have a foolish vocabulary, foolish sense of words, don't know when to say the right thing at the right time to the right person, and their mouth will precipitate their ruin. That is the effect of the cause. And their lips are the snare of his life. A snare just means a trap, a bait, so they find themselves entrapped by their own words. Next verse, "The words of a slanderer are like delicacies, and they go down into the inner parts of the heart." So slanderers, now gossip queens and drama junkies, they love slander. They don't evaluate the correctness of the claims. They just like it because it's a juicy bit of gossip. And those who have an appetite and aptitude for gossip will delight in the words of a slanderer. There are 3 levels of people: great minds, which discuss ideas. Level 2 is average minds, which discuss events, and then there are base minds, which discuss people. Slanderers and gossipers fall into the lower tier category. Verse 13, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." So conversation consists of listening and talking, and we have to really listen to what we say before we say what we say. We cannot, interrupt anyone, or in a judicial matter especially. He comments that on the 17th verse. We got one in between that. Verse 15, "The heart of the understanding one gets knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." So remember, conversation consists of 2 essential elements: speaking and listening. So the ear of the wise will gravitate towards people who expound on knowledge, who express knowledge, who embody knowledge, who have knowledge, and they will be the wiser for it. Verse 17, "The first to state his own case is right, until another comes and examines him." So in a court of law, one might be impressed and persuaded by the opening attorney's argument, but then the other one has the advantage of crafting his response in light of what their predecessor has said, whereas the opening statement, the one to whom the opening statement is, the prerogative is reserved, will not have the similar advantage. Verse 21, death and life are in the powers of the tongue, and those loving it eat its fruits. So there is power in the tongue, literally the power of death and life. Many people have died because of words that were spoken by themselves or others. They said the wrong thing to the wrong person in the wrong way at the wrong time, and they invited their own death and destruction. But words are also sources of life and health and healing and well-being and uplifting and positive. And whether you love death or life, you will desire and gravitate towards the words which express the ones that you are in favor of. Final one, verse 23. The poor speaks beseechingly, but the rich answers fiercely. So rich, wealthy people have the privilege and advantage and the luxury that the poor people lack. They can answer fiercely because they have the protection of their resources and their status, whereas the poor must of necessity speak more humbly in order to be, it's just an appropriate expression of all people, of all classes. So rich people should also speak beseechingly, but they have the advantage and the privilege that the poor largely lack of speaking fiercely. Now we're going to get into the lesson itself, which is chapter 19. The opening verse reads, better is the poor walking in his integrity than one of perverse lips who is a fool. So Solomon has his priorities in order. He was the world's wealthiest man at the time in which he lived, but he valued his integrity, which was priceless and precious, and he'd rather be poor with his integrity intact than to amass and accumulate more wealth and lose his integrity in the process thereof. And perversity of lips are usually an indication of foolishness. Perverse indicates anything that is vulgar, profane, or inappropriate, or just off topic, or just anything along those lines that is a mark of a fool. So we can measure and assess and judge people by the words that they speak, and we will know that one who resorts to profanity, which is never necessary, those who do so largely lack the intelligence, education, culture, and character to otherwise express themselves. That's how we know this person is a fool. Also, desire without knowledge is not good, and he who hurries with his feet sins. So this ties into prayer, and I'm going to explain why. Too many people pray asking, dictating their own selfish desires to be blessed. Too many people rush into plans in motion and then ask Yahweh or God or whatever they call him to bless their plans after they neglected to consult him. So we have to begin and end, and there is a divine timetable. The creator and controller of the cosmos is in control of it. He will reveal his will eventually and inevitably if we are patient and enduring. But if we hurry with our feet, we rush into activities or agendas that seem so good to us, make so much sense to us on the surface, without his blessing or consent, we will invite trouble and ruin. So it is a sin to step ahead of Yahweh in as much as it is a sin to lag behind him. And we have a few verses which speak, at least one that speaks of laziness, the 15th one. We'll get to that at the end. The foolishness of a man perverts his way, and his heart is wroth against Yahweh. So foolish and sinful people blame Yahweh for their troubles, when 9 out of 10 cases it's a result and a consequence of their own sin. Sin by its very nature is retaliatory. If you sin or injure a sinner, they will respond in a sinful response. And of course, it's not so simple, because a lot of the hardships and setbacks and trials are are sent by Yahweh are sent by the adversary at the behest and the permission of Yahweh, and the inferior entity, the adversary, cannot operate without his permission. But the point of the passage is, don't be mad at Yahweh. He is the one, he is the ticket, he is the one who has the power to redeem your situation. So don't blame him for any situation you got into, whether it's or even an innocent situation such as a child dying. This is a lapse for faith of many people. They question, where is God? Where is this loving God who would allow my own child to die? So that's another form of sin, and it's almost reasonable in light of the sinner who invites his own trouble and ruin as a cause and effect of their own sin, but it is still sin nonetheless. Wealth adds many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend. So wealth adds many friends, I would add. When you have money and resources, people will naturally gravitate to you, but it's not you they're after. They're after your resources and your wealth and what you can do for them. Whereas the poor do not have the luxury. They are poor people. They cannot receive what they want from other poor people. So there is going to be bound to be more separation from the poorer lower classes than the upper classes, and plenty of leeches come with the blessing of wealth. So wealth is a great servant for the humble, but a terrible master for the proud. A false witness does not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies does not escape. Now this I've mentioned several times in Proverbs. The way we have to interpret them are as principles, not as promises. A false witness, most false witness and liars get caught eventually, but not every one of them does. But as a principle, they should not. As a principle, they will expose themselves for who they are and what they did, because dishonesty can conceal itself in layers, but eventually you have a web of lies so complex that the liar loses track of them, and the truth eventually unfolds and unseals itself in response to their efforts to suppress their own dishonesty. Many entreat the favor of the noble, and all are friends with him who gives gifts. So people who are noble, this again ties into the rich. The noble would have been, I interpret this as the class of aristocrats, the noble class, and many who rank below them would curry their favor in the interest of procuring advantages or privileges or distributions from their hand. And all are friends to him who gives gifts. That's pretty self-evident. A gift is a mark and a reminder, an expression of friendship. So that's one of the things we do for friends at birthdays. We get them presents and gifts, and this is a mark of friends and familyship. All the brothers of the poor shall hate him. How much more shall his friends go far from him? So this is somewhat of a difficult, from my personal vantage point, to interpret, because why would the brother of a poor man hate him because he's in his same miserable and degraded condition more than his brothers? So this ties into the earlier thing of what we read. The poor is separated from his very friends. So his friends, they leave them, they desert him because, they're in the same, they can't wring anything out of him. They're in the same miserable, pathetic, degraded condition. So they gravitate towards someone who has something they want or something they can give, because as we read in the previous verse, all are friends to him who gives gifts. The poor are not so fortunate as most of us to be able to give gifts as expressions and reminders and tokens of their friendship. Oh, and I neglected to read, he pursues promises, they are gone. So promises, the promises of Yahweh are sealed in stone. They are as good as his words, but the promise of men, not so much. Many dishonest politicians testify to this fact. They promise you the moon and then they don't deliver. And 4 years later, another one arises and promise you the moon that his predecessor failed to deliver. You vote them in and then nothing changes. He who gets heart loves his own life. He who guards understanding finds good. So the heart is the source of life. It pumps our blood into our. It is a vital organ without which our physical bodies could not function or survive. And understanding is a wellspring of good. It is good in itself, but it also leads to goodness in this life. So keep understanding and you will find good. Now, the word guard or keep, if we interpret it as keeps, as it is translated into other translation, or even guards, it means to protect what understanding you have in order to build on that foundation, to amass more knowledge, and then you will find good from the goodness that you already have on top of the good that you already had to begin with. A false witness does not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies perishes. So we've already read something nearly identical in the 5th verse. This is the 9th verse, but here we have the added injunction that the liar, one who breathes out lies, that's another detail. That means they just breathe, they speak lies, they tell lies, they are lies, and they will perish. They will die and decay and perish as a result of their own lying lifestyle, which invites much trouble and ruin that they would lack if they had just simply stuck to the honest truth. And a false witness does not go unpunished. It was one of the Decalogue commandments to not bear false witness, and there would have been grave penalties to violating this. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. So what is a fool going to do with wealth and luxury but lavish it foolishly, and luxury should by right belong to those who are prudent and circumspect in the uses and display of their resources. There is a foolish way to wallow in luxury, and luxury for a fool is going to invite trouble and idleness and just bad destructive influences, whereas the wise and prudent can manage luxury without being wallowed or swallowed or succumbing completely to its snares. And Solomon and many of these sages were conservative socioeconomics. He speaks about the need to tenderly regard and care for and provide for the poor, and to give them justice that they seek, and not let bribes pervert the ordinary operation of justice. But he seems to accept that the socioeconomic order, the servants and princes, were set in stone. They were ordained from heaven. So even less than luxury being fitted for a fool is a servant ruling over princes. A man's discretion makes him patient, and his adorning is to pass over a transgression. So discretion is the quality of not making oneself known. It's being discreet with the secrets of others, and they will they won't betray a trust and this having this quality has the additional causational effect of building patience and endurances. And another one of the benefits of this quality of patience is that you are a forgiving person. So forgiveness is something we all want and all need, but often fail to provide those who ask for it. But a discreet and patient person will have no problem. They will in fact love to just forgive their brother. And the way I feel the best way to eliminate the forgiveness is just to not take offense in the first place unnecessarily. Don't take anything personally, but some things, do demand a greater ordeal to forgive. But with patience and discretion, we can acquire the means to forgive those who have wronged us. The king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his delight is like the dew of the grass. So Solomon is writing from a royal vantage point. He was a king. That was his job. That was his life. That was his identity. That was his vocation. And, best stay away from his wrath. Don't get on his wrong side, because absolute monarchs in the ancient Near East had the power of life over death. So the roaring of a lion was a fierce metaphor and analogy to which he compared it. But on the gentler side, the dew on the grass, that just evokes pleasant images of springtime and just everything else, and that is comparable to pleasing one's sovereign or king. A foolish son is a calamity to his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dripping. So he's writing from the vantage point of a father and husband. He was both, and foolish sons are a disgrace and embarrassment and a shame to the ones who raised them. Realistically, not every righteous parent produces a righteous offspring. We witnessed this in Eli and Samuel himself, and Solomon himself. His son and successor Rehoboam had none of the qualities or materials for rulership that his father possessed, in spite of this book of instructions, which I think the immediate audience was his son or sons, and he had many. But he says a lot about the potentially destructive qualities of wives, and very little comparably on the husband. But I think in 11:29 he writes that he who stirs up provocation in his own household is something negative. So he, being a male, and his own would have been the possession and property, the male, and husband and father would have been the owner of that household. But here he compares to contentious wives. These are the ones who provoke drama unnecessarily and just live for contention between them and others. And living in the same household as such a one is likened to a continual dripping. It's a bothersome noise, in as much as the woman who is contentious is a perpetual nuisance, in as much as a drop from the ceiling that just won't go away. Houses and riches are the inheritance from fathers, but an understanding wife is from Yahweh. So there are things which the earth and our family can provide. The inheritance. The father can lay an inheritance and leave their son something to live by after they're gone, and that is, as a result of their own diligence or their own inherited wealth that they could not exhaust in their own lifetime. But an understanding wife is truly a gift from heaven, and an understanding wife, I believe the most extensive treatment on this, or the ideal wife, is from the 31st chapter, not written by Solomon, verses 10 through all the way through. But an understanding wife. Now, women are difficult to understand. One can spend an entire lifetime with them, but not unlock all their mysteries. But one who understands you is a treasure and a delight. Final verse. Laziness makes one fall into a deep sleep, and an idle being suffers hunger. So idleness and laziness and just sleeping the day away, Solomon has nothing not negative to say about such people. And in the 18th chapter, 9th verse, he says, also, he who is slack in his work is a brother of a master destroyer. So in here we witness the destructive invitations that laziness and idleness brings when they're destroying their own bodies. They're suffering hunger as a result of their own own laziness because they don't want to work. They want, but they don't want to work, so they're going to starve because they'd rather starve than work, and that it can be eliminated. The destructive potential and effects of laziness and idleness can be eliminated simply by strapping up, putting on the work boots, and getting done what needs to be done. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.